Good morning, Les. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time today. You are in one of the countries that is, I believe, the front runner or globally seen as a front runner from, let's say, opening everything again. But let's take a step back. We're now in the second half of May, right? So you either had to prepare your half-yearly reports or take stock for the group. At what point in time did you think that's not just the media hype, but it's a bit more serious from a COVID situation? But equally, if I'd met you in 2019, what was your outlook for New Zealand and your portfolio for 2020?
Well, we had come off 4 or 5 really good years post GFC, and tourism in New Zealand was growing at 8 or 9%. In fact, forecasting was very easy. We simply took last year's budget, put a big fat red 10% on it. Saved the owner doing that. It was as easy as that. But then 2019 was a little flat. New Zealand had experienced a little smack on the hand, if you like, from China.
Yeah.
Around some political comments. And there was a lot of things happening too in China, as you know, with the trade war.
Yeah.
Things had just softened a little bit, and they're an important market. So we had seen a flat year, and we were a little concerned probably. And we knew we were going to go. 2020 was supposed to be an ordinary year with marginal growth, maybe 1 or 2%. But New Zealand were expecting a very big 2021. We have America's Cup and APEC.
Yeah.
And by coincidence, a number of other major sporting events. So we were going to be patient. 2020 was going to be okay. However, actually, the summer was pretty strong. I think we were caught off guard a little bit. December, January, we were looking really good. February actually held up okay, even despite that sort of early resistance out of China in February, the market.
But did you see? That's my question to you. Were you just thinking, yeah, it's not gonna be a pandemic, right? Because I don't think anybody talked pandemics in January and February. And you're saying the bookings might have slowed down, but it wasn't painful. Did you already sit down and say it's gonna crash?
Oh, I think you're right. I don't think anyone knew that. But we were certainly careful. I remember having a conversation with my procurement manager in late January, saying order 5,000 masks for the hotels now. There was enough in the media, certainly here, for us to begin to think it can't be contained. I mean, we were pretty certain it couldn't be contained. But probably, like most people, we thought at worst this is probably a 6-month issue.
Yeah.
And then, of course, things changed very, very quickly, and we went into crisis mode. I mean, it was a time of making rapid decisions. You couldn't even craft an email before you'd have to, delete that and make another decision. And I was fortunate. My owner, gave me sort of complete support, and our executive team, and really sort of allowed us to get on and make those decisions. We didn't even have time often to consult with him. And of course, that meant that he was free then to look at, the larger picture and to focus on, conversations with banks and things like that. So it was really crisis mode, and we quickly realised that we needed to make some major decisions. We were probably one of the earlier movers in terms of planning a full restructure. I had a Zoom call with a whole lot of our executive team and leaders across the country, and I remember I was in tears. Actually, it was a brutal conversation because I knew what they didn't know, that this was going to be bad at that point. I'm not saying for a moment I knew before that, but I certainly knew what ramifications was going to have on people's roles. So we moved pretty quickly, and the government here moved equally as quickly to provide a wage subsidy, which gave us kind of a 12-week opportunity to reassess things, and that meant that most salary and wages were subsidised.
When did that 12-week start?
Well, actually, from today, it must be about 11 weeks ago, because it's due to expire. It's now been extended another 8 weeks.
Okay.
And that's been really helpful, especially for business, because it has just given us a chance to reassess things. Unfortunately, it won't save jobs, but it's certainly cushioned the landing.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other thing, it was a cash injection as well, which was helpful, especially when you're looking at zero revenues. But in our particular group's situation, things were complex. We had a quarantine hotel that we provided to the government, and we also provided 2 hotels for managed isolation facilities. As you know, like most places in the country, there's a 14-day quarantine period if you come off a plane, and our hotels were at the front line of that. We volunteered our hotels. Actually, we formed an alliance with a COO, who we have a strong relationship with, because as part of our Hind management portfolio, we have a Novotel. And so between the vice president of the COO in New Zealand and myself, we were able to form a bit of alliance, and they led that. And we're really pleased. It was a challenging time for our employees, especially being on the front line of that health aspect. But we learned, interestingly enough, we learned a lot about that.
But how do you manage that emotional part? Because when you come to a certain position, I think people underestimate that you still have emotions, right? Even though you have to take decisions that you can choose between bad and worse, right? There's unfortunately no upside. How was that emotionally going through that company from yourself?
Oh, it was really challenging. But we've always been transparent. So in the good times, we've always been a company that's, I'd say, we would like to think we're one of the leading tourism businesses in New Zealand around community involvement and diversity, cultural involvement. It's a big part of who we are. Of course, money is always first, but the way we go about making money is a very close second.
Yeah.
So I guess I was able to trade on that a little bit, in that, we had some reputation, and I believe most of our people understood that we were coming from the right place.
Yeah.
But obviously, as a leader, that puts a great deal of stress on you, because you know these people, and we're not a huge hotel company, and in a lot of cases, I'd recruited people, individuals across the company myself, so difficult having conversations with them after saying, I begged you to join us, and now unfortunately we're going to have to discuss a new role for you. I'd be quick to say that I certainly didn't take part in all those conversations, but I sit in on them regularly enough to remind me how difficult they are. And invariably I get emotional because it's tough. But a lot of kudos needs to go to our talent and culture teams who are at the front of those things. But again, Fabian, we've been really quick to be as transparent as we can with people, pass on every piece of information that's available.
So how do you then now keep that communication up? Right? Because it kind of goes into I wouldn't say a wave format, but it's, are you in the camp that says, okay, it's better to over communicate and have bi-weekly calls with everybody so they can ask any kind of questions, or we're planning it like I don't want to say a newsletter, but a 2-weekly one, so we don't over communicate and really don't get people nervous, because there's so many news are coming in every hour that you kind of think, okay, if I tell something right now, and then in 20 minutes, something else comes up, as you said, my email is redundant.
That's right. You raise a good point. Sometimes the best form of action was inaction, because things were changing so much.
Yeah.
Probably the answer to your question is a little bit of hybrid. Is communicate as much as we can, but also be mindful of things. For instance, we would, at our head office, we call it a support office, but we would have a weekly coffee chat, which we would normally do on a Monday morning in head office anyway with the wider team.
So anyways, that was always in place beforehand?
Always in place.
Okay.
And we began to do that, on Zoom. But then I became a bit wary that maybe some of those people in the pictures were having discussions around their roles, and it wasn't appropriate.
Yeah.
Or, it's just not right to be having to pretend everything is fine when it's not. The answer to that is a lot of private conversations, and I've personally made a lot of calls to people, and I know my managers have been instructed to do that, have one-on-one conversations, email people. Actually, I'm traveling to one of our regions this week for the first time. That particular hotel, I think we've made upwards of 120 people redundant. But I've invited them all to come in and have lunch over a period of 2 or 3 hours. So we keep that distancing, of course. In New Zealand at the moment, we're permitted to have groups of 10. But I'm taking the Director of Talent and Culture with me, and we want to sit down and just answer any questions, be as transparent as we can. We're not aware of a great deal of anger. Actually, our people have been really good. But there'll be some frustrations and some questions. So we just want to be as open as possible. And we also feel that since we've come up with that idea, we're going to continue to do that. Have a monthly get-together for employees, whether they're our employees or not, but remain connected to them, for 12, 18 months if need be. We're also extending all our employee benefits to former employees now forever.
Oh, fantastic. So you're talking healthcare and other items?
Where we can, yeah. I guess more for frontline people, because actually the younger people are not interested in healthcare.
Yeah.
It's only us older people who seem to care about it. But things like F&B discounts, complimentary rooms, we're just going to keep that stuff up. And then, of course, hope to attract them back in time.
That's a good segue. Because now, as I said in the beginning, New Zealand seems to be in the forefront of coming out of it, having done a very good job in containing it. Like Australia, we're talking about travel bubbles with Australia and New Zealand. You can possibly travel in between. And then what caught my eyes, I think, was one of your LinkedIn posts where you said, oh no, we keep the dance floor open, right? We are actually going to open our hotels. And that's a big statement to make, because when I talk to other executives, a lot of times, and we hear that from other countries, is they're concerned that I need about 60-65% to actually break even, right? And it's much better keeping it closed until the high season comes, because all of a sudden it's not going to help me to open, right? And then there along comes you, and you say like, no, we're going to have a party, right?
Well, I mean, obviously there's some prudent financial considerations amongst that. I mean, I guess the first of all, Fabian, our government has done its best it can to support tourism sector. Yep. Probably like most tourism sectors in the world, we always feel that's not enough.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to be or do as a company is get caught up in that negativity and get involved with those politics.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly want to continue to be a voice for the industry. But if you get too caught up in that, you can go down a negative pathway, and that's not helpful. Because what's important in New Zealand in this next 6 months is that the decisions we make around tourism are going to be defining. So yes, there is an opportunity to reset some things, but it's got to be positive conversation. So first of all, it was part of a mindset saying, let's be positive.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked out at our planned developments, and we had 3 in the pipeline. We've approached those 3 sets of shareholders. In one case, one of the hotels is owned by us and managed, of course, by us. The other 2 we're managing. And we talked those shareholders through what we were thinking. That we believe within 18 months, things will be back to a level where at least we'll be financially neutral. And if we're not in the market and we don't keep our team members connected to us, we won't be able to maximize the opportunity. Because I'm old enough to remember a number of these ups and downs over the years. And I don't know about where you are in Asia, but I can tell you what happened post GFC was that we were surprised by the tourism recovery. It caught us off guard. And especially our tourism infrastructure. It lagged behind, and it's still lagging behind. We never quite caught back up. And I think it's an important lesson, especially for younger executives. The recovery will come, and you need to be paying some attention to that, because otherwise you'll get caught out. I'm not saying that's where all your energy needs to be at the moment, but it needs to be part of your mind, because the upside will be tremendous. I mean, we know that tourism was growing around the world at 6 to 8% annually anyway, and we will get back to that point. And in New Zealand especially, we lacked hotel stock. We lacked a lot of key pieces of infrastructure. And there were a lot of conversations going on about bed taxes and tourism taxes, and we're in danger of being fragmented around all those things.
Yep.
So there's a chance now for us to get that right. But back to your original point, is we've taken the approach that we want to commit to those investments as you know, hotel investments are long-term investments anyway. And our shareholders, none of them are in for the short term. Several of them are generational investors. And we know that those assets will appreciate well. They're good quality buildings. And it's interesting, Fabian, since making that announcement, we've just gained a lot of support. I think when other businesses see other people be confident, it generates that feeling. So, I mean, we certainly haven't said we'll do it and crossed our fingers. There's prudent planning behind it, but we're determined at the same time to move forward. The other thing, which I guess we're all doing at the moment, is we have really looked at our operating model, and when we reopen those hotels or open those hotels, we will be a slimmer beast for sure.
So how is it then? How's it going to transpire? And the reason I'm asking is a lot of countries are now talking about domestic and leisure will come first, right? And I'm fully on board with that. But then I have concerns that some places in the world have more international than domestic power. And even if you have domestic, I want to say, power to keep it going for a little bit, it's not enough to saturate the hotel market itself, because there's just people are not going to travel every week right now because they are allowed to, right? Because it's also a personal cash constraint. So it's essentially two questions. One is, do you think you're going to see a bit of revenge travel on the domestic market? And then 2021, with all the events that were supposed to come and give you a stellar year, will it just shrug off the COVID and say, once we're sweet by the end of the year, 2021 will be as magnificent as we saw it a year ago?
Yeah, I'm a little pessimistic about the domestic tourism recovery. And I know it hasn't been the most popular opinion here, but we know that corporate travellers, for instance, are facing budget restraints.
Yeah. We
know that conferencing is challenging. Although, this week we've seen some green shoots actually of conference interest for the last quarter. We also know that domestic travellers, mum and dad, they only travel seasonally. Public holidays, school holidays, and other people are still subject to, financial constraints. There's a lot of people unemployed or being cautious. And then other than that, there's a lot of uncertainty about travel at the moment. So, yes, I think there's a potential for a little revenge travelling, and I think we might see a bit of a spike, but it will settle down. And my best guess is it's probably half of what it was previously, which will be insufficient to meet our needs. So that's why we're in that really, although New Zealand has overcome the health crisis that we trust it has, actually the biggest crisis is in front of us. And we'll see a lot of tourism businesses, especially, go to the wall in the next 3 to 6 months. I think many will find that reopening costs them more money than closing.
Yeah.
And then in regards to the second part of the question, in terms of 2021, will we be able to shrug that off? You know what? It comes really down to the confidence the government shows. If we're able to commit to something like APEC and say, for them to put a stake in the ground and saying it's happening, all the other events will feed off that.
Okay.
It's really important by having that. We believe the America's Cup won't necessarily generate a lot of international tourism, but it certainly will domestic, because New Zealanders love the America's Cup. So, maybe that's a little bit more sound in terms of the potential for success. But, it's a really good question, because it won't take much, Fabian. It just needs 1 or 2 events. And that's probably where we're looking for the government to say, well, let's underwrite a couple of these things.
Yeah, it's the perception, right? It's the perception out there. Talking about international travel, do you think we're going to have those drip feeding of different markets? And that the government because here's a tricky part, right? The government kind of needs to assess, is that other government trustworthy of sending people to New Zealand? I know you will never be popular regardless of what side of the answer you're on, but it's a valid question to say, are you going to discriminate one country over another? And I don't mean discrimination in a bad way. I'm just meaning, are you going to be selective of who you're allowing back in the country? Will that drip feed kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we will have to be, especially given that we're overcome it. And I guess I don't know the science and one thing I've learned through this, it's best not to talk as like you're a medical expert. But certainly, we seem to largely have it under control. So any exposure would really stand out. I'm assuming we don't have a great deal of herd community in New Zealand. Immunity, sorry. So air corridors are going to be very important to us. What we're anxious to see is obviously the Australian bubble, and from what I can read and understand, that there's a real possibility that'll happen. It might come into realisation, say, the last quarter of this year, which would be great because Australians are a big market for us, obviously. And New Zealanders are a big market for Australia as well. I think we're their second largest tourism market outside of China. But the ability to maybe partner up with countries like Singapore and Vietnam, Korea, China, obviously. We would expect our government to be, sending delegations to those countries now to be having those early discussions about, is this possible, or what might it look like? Because they're vital. There's obviously politics involved, and we certainly won't get involved with that. But from a tourism point of view, we want to see those discussions taking part, because that adds to that confidence picture and helps us build a framework to look to move ahead. But yes, unfortunately, I think it is going to be the case that we're going to have to be selective, but we must. There's a lot of complexities around that, and our industry is keen not to come across as greedy. We don't want to do that at the cost of anybody's health, of course. But at the same time, we'd like to see plans in action. New Zealanders are great travellers too, so I'm sure there are markets pretty keen to get New Zealanders back as well.
Now, if we're now looking at the future of travel, you hear people talking about hygiene is a new luxury, right? Other people might talk about intimacy, or being close with groups of friends is another luxury, right? How do you think the future from a booking or from a guest perspective will change? And equally, you alluded to that earlier. You said when we're reopening, we will most probably be a slimmer version of it, right? What are the big key lessons that you have learned over that time to say, okay, we can actually change our operating model, or even we have to in order to be prepared?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is that we've got to be mindful of what the guest wants. Because sometimes our industry can be pretty good at opposing.
Do you think we know already?
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think we're guilty sometimes of saying to someone, this is what you'll get. We've got to make sure that we do plenty of research and understand, what their concerns are and their fears potentially. I think what will happen is that some of that technology that was kind of in the background, and some hotel chains were at the forefront of that, and others maybe a bit further back, that will be now forced to the front, which will be good, I think, because one thing that our industry really needs to develop is higher productivity. We obviously need to maintain that personal touch. I mean, that's why we're in the business anyway, because we love those sort of interactions and the conversations and things like that. But yeah, some of that technology now will be forced upon us, which is great. I know internally, we've hurried those conversations along. But I think that'll be good. Obviously, there's just some concerns around privacy and around collection of data, and I know we have to be, mindful of that. So I think the guest will appreciate that. And then, as a destination, New Zealand needs to continue to develop its uniqueness and its ability to sell its sustainability and its environmental story. And those things will probably come through a little bit more as well. But the travel experience is definitely going to change. But Fabian, people have really short memories.
It's funny that you say that. You have this camp of people saying, Fabian, people have really short memories, and then you have the other camp that says, oh my God, no. If somebody just touches my pillow without gloves, I'm gonna go crazy.
Well, I think well-meaning people, especially people on the sidelines of tourism, have this view about how our industry should be. And I'll give you a very good example. In New Zealand, we were in a lockdown situation for 6 weeks, and all the fast food chains were down. And there was a lot of discussion from well-meaning people saying, this is an opportunity for people to reset their diets. And yet the day fast food chains opened up, there were queues. Yeah. people soon go back to what's comfortable and to their old habits. So yes, much like post 9/11, where we experienced, heightened security, but we've all adjusted to that now. Although it's an inconvenience, but we've adjusted. You make any international flight, you've got to go through those hoops. There'll probably be similar things in regarding health. It'll be another added complexity, but we'll work our way through it. People adapt, but reminded of the example. People will always find the shortest path, and I guess our job is, if you're an innovator or you're someone who's looking to develop something unique, you've got to guess what that shortest path is and make that available to people. Because my experience, technology, especially around hotels, when it's done incorrectly, gets very complex. I guess wants something that's seamless. So we're going to have to get that right, but we'll adjust.
But is that innovation, or would you just say catching up? Because I hear so many people talking about, it's going to be great innovation. Great innovation will be born out of it. And I go but if you look around, that all the money is now being poured into how to fight COVID at the moment, right? And innovation, the last thing I want is another 150 different brands popping up by one of the major brands, because they think it's yet another great idea to increase from 50 brands to 300 brands. Have you found that yourself, that you looked at your own brand and you said it actually withstands?
Yes, because we've recently been through that exercise.
Okay.
We actually did a whole complete revamp based on a whole new set of values. So we have kind of reinvented ourselves. But I'll tell you, an interesting discussion we're having at the moment is around dynamic pricing. And previously, in a market that was extreme, and a client might be forced, let me use a bad example, they might pay $1,000 for a room that might normally be $250 because demand meant that they had to. And they would pay it and you'd never see them again. We're having a discussion now, kind of in this new environment, or the new train of thought, saying, should we be placing limitations on the prices we charge? Should there be a band? There's always a floor, of course, with pricing, but should there be a ceiling? Because now we need those travellers more than ever. The ones that we have been saying, the last room's $1,000, because what choice have you got? Is it time for, as a group, where we have a look at that? So, we're certainly looking at our model and, what else we can do, where we can bring more value, because there's a push, especially in New Zealand, for the domestic client to enjoy lower pricing, to try and generate and stir that market. But of course, as you know, that's just not a sensible approach. So certainly we're looking at that model, but I wouldn't say we would look to be a low cost model at all. I think we just got to be clever. There's always, I'm a great believer in taking a great idea and making it better. So I'm just waiting for one of my competitors to come up with something great, and I can look at that and pull it apart. But we should all move forward. But I agree with you. You shouldn't get too caught up in innovation. You do need to remind yourself what service we're trying to provide and what solution we're trying to provide. And that's hospitality is about doing the basics really well.
Yeah.
The best examples of hospitality are the people who do it really well. It's not because they have the coolest technology.
Oh, yeah. If we meet in 2025, right? Hopefully in person. Are we going to look back at this time and say, thanks God that it's what we needed? Or are we going to look a bit like from a Terminator perspective, saying that's when it all went downhill? From a perspective of kind of those things occurring more and more?
Yeah, that's a good question. Really good question. One thing that came out of the GFC was that we looked at all our costs, and we looked at all our efficiencies, and we really examined what we were about. So I think if you're a younger person in the industry, you wouldn't have been through this. And I think those people in 2025 will be thinking, well, I've learned so much. And they'll probably drive that innovation or that model to be better. Especially in New Zealand, because there's been so many ups and downs. And I'm sure in Asia, things like SARS and all sorts of things. We've always been conscious not to have too much fat in our operation. So I don't know in terms of operating model in 2025, things will be too much different. I don't think we would have learned great lessons. But yeah, to your question, will things be completely different? No, I don't believe they will be. They'll be different for sure, but I don't think they will, because there's still fundamentals. People still want to travel and experience new things. And, you know, in our particular corner of the world, we've got things that, you know, you can't see anywhere else in the world. But yeah, what that traveller looks like might be really interesting. Yeah, I guess our job is to try and, you know, analyse what they're looking for and deliver on that. It's probably more importantly, to answer your question, more importantly, we will need to be closer to our guests than we've ever been. We have to have really good market data.
Now, I personally always thought hospitality never got the credit it deserved over the years. It was always an industry that was somewhat I don't want to say looked down upon, but it wasn't one of the things that you wake up in the morning and you go, I want to be a hotel manager, right? And I think this pandemic has highlighted that travel is this glue that keeps everything together. And what we looked at from a commodity, and it has become a commodity. I mean, I jump on the plane and I'm in Bali in 2 hours. Jump on a plane and in 2 hours I'm in Bangkok. In 10 hours I'm in Auckland, right? That wasn't possible when I was 10 years old. And I think people realizing now that travel is actually not a commodity, or not anymore a commodity. What would your advice be to somebody now coming out of uni, right? And you would say, here's a reason why you should actually join hospitality, even though we just got battered.
Well, I mean, I think that it's great that you mentioned that someone from hospitality or tourism is coming out of uni, because, you know, in previous years that's not always been the case. You know, probably 10% have come out of uni. Most people have, because it's an unskilled workforce, or we can start off unskilled and you can come into it and gain those skills. You know,
because it is not unskilled, right? And I fundamentally agree with you. It is not unskilled. It's like common sense. Common sense is not common.
Well, that's right. And I get frustrated when I hear people say that, well, we can retrain tourism people to do other things. It's disrespectful to the skills they've got. Sure, they can learn other things, but actually they've got a lot of skill. So look, I think it's an exciting time to be in tourism, because what a great big challenge. There's problems to be solved. I think that's incredible. And you can, I mean, geez, some days it's hard to see the opportunity, but it's there, and maybe someone who thinks differently can see things that are right in front of our face. I think it's amazing. I mean, the reason I'm in tourism is because I love people. You know, I never wanted to be a hotel manager. I always wanted to be a great waiter. You know, that's my dream job. I was a sommelier by trade, and I loved being the sommelier. I'd want to do that more than anybody. Unfortunately, I just kept on getting more responsibility, and now I don't even get
too much wine.
Well, these days I don't even get to work in a hotel, which is even more frustrating, you know, because that's what I enjoy doing more than anything. And like, if my experience is anything to go by, then, you know, it's just so much fun, and there's so much innovation. Things change so quickly. Every day is different. And as you know, there's always some good work stories. You know, I don't think that has changed. I think it's really, really exciting. But what we do need is more highly qualified people coming in, out of university, out of training technologies. You know, I think that would be great to see more and more people coming in. So my advice to anyone coming out of university anywhere in the world is to send me your CV, because I'll grab you. If you've got talent and ability, then you should be working for me. And I just think that one aspect that will change for hotels, especially around employment, is that I think there'll be a shift towards more outsourcing. You know, for example, I know a lot of hotels outsource housekeeping services.
Mhm.
I would see that becoming more predominant. I think all parts, especially from a head office point of view, in terms of marketing, potentially sales, human resources, all those costs that a lot of them we've held in-house, I think in future will be outsourced, or we'll plug into that gig economy much more.
Yep.
Because probably the big lesson we've learned through all of this is the flexibility of our workforce. I mean, I know we're all pretty good at having part-time and casual employees, but that's going to change. And I can also see employees, especially senior employees, coming to us in the future and saying, what about redundancy clauses? In New Zealand, our labour laws have been pretty kind in that regard. So I think that's an area of hotels that's going to be explored. That's going to be really interesting.
I think 100% with you. I'm a big believer in not the gig economy, but somebody will buy your brain for a couple of months and then say, that's it, right? I only need you for 6 months to get me from here to here. But
That's right.
I need you to do the strategy, but I don't think you're the right person to do the tactics. So once we are at that level, I now need to find somebody who is essentially a road warrior and just bulldozes the strategy through from a tactic perspective. Or a project manager, whatever you want to call it, and therefore you are employed more and more short term, always for 6 months to a year, 6 months to a year, 1 year to 2 years.
That's right. I agree. I think employers will be very cautious when it comes to attaching too many structures back into their businesses. I think they'll contract a lot of those things out, fixed term contracts. Yep. So you're dead right. That's going to be, but that's going to present opportunity because you're going to be potentially be able to, work for 3 or 4 different organisations in the space of a week. So I think that'll be the big shift.
There was a really depressing article from Davos, and he wrote the Homo Sapiens, I think, is one of his books. Israeli guy. And he essentially said, we're going to have this useless class, which is the people that you can't retrain, and useless from a perspective of they have no output into the economy. They're just taking money out, right? And he brings up a couple of examples. And one thing that really stuck with me is that he said, when we grew up, we were fighting against exploitation, right? Against automation, against really, is my job going to be replaced by somebody cheaper, younger, whatever it might be? And he mentioned that in the future, chances are you have to fight against relevancy. Mm-hmm. So by the time you're employed and by the time you start, your job has already been made redundant and changed or taken over by technology, so that by the time you start, it's a little bit like, this is your new job.
Yeah.
Right. And the skill of the future is the ability to really quickly reskill across all of those different items. And I think in hotels, it's great for that, because if you learn the skill in housekeeping, you can then learn the skill in front office. You can then, it's a bit like the management. You remember those 18 months management trainee programs in the US?
Yes.
I don't know if they're still like this, where you do 3 months housekeeping, 3 months front office, 3 months this. And I think this is brilliant, and it allows that employee to be used, and from a cost perspective, even better. You can move people around and then say, okay, if I put that person from front desk into F&B just for those 2 hours, I actually make 10% more revenue because of their upselling skills. But when it's arrival time, we got to put him on the front desk or her on the front desk because all the upsells are coming in.
It's interesting you say that. You know that of the core teams that we've kept in our hotels with modest occupancies, they've all been chosen because of their multi-skills. So you're absolutely correct. It's those people who are the most valuable.
Yeah.
So you might be right. There might be a rise again in this sort of 18-month internment where you ended up working across all departments. But certainly there'll be a push to have multi-skills.
I mean, that's, if I think about New Zealand, if somebody would have said, you want to do a gap year, I have 5, 6 hotels, right? you're going into each hotel, right, for 4 or 5 months, and you go through it, right? You learn this and this here, you apply it in the next one, you go here and here. It'd be brilliant. I would have bitten your hand off, because I'm going to New Zealand, and it's a lot of people's at least bucket lists, right?
Yeah.
So I can tick that off very early on, and you get the talent. It's like Australia saying, who wants to live on an island for a year and get $1 million or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know that there's a further piece there? Do you know that people who do that come, for example, to New Zealand for a year to work? They end up being connected to New Zealand for life.
Definitely.
And we find that research will tell you that actually a lot of business gets done in future years because people are comfortable with that area. So it's a great investment. And that's one of the benefits of the student market. You know, they become attached to that country forever. So, you know, and then there's forever a transiting of information. So, yeah, you're right. Well, Fabian, it's been really good to talk to you, and